as stated previously, warfare necessitated greater economic and military cooperation amongst the American colonists. Prior to this, each colony acted more or less as a separate entity that dealt with England on its own and kind of dealt with the other colonies if it wanted to or didn't want to. With the necessity of a French and Native American enemy at their border and in their midst, the colonial governments were suddenly forced to collaborate with one another and cooperate on a scale hitherto unheard of. Colonial militias had to be where they had to be, and the difference as to whether they were a New York militia or a New Jersey militia or a Virginian militia was less important than whether they were on the British or French side in the war. Benjamin Franklin famously rallied support with this image here. Join or die. It shows a snake segmented into multiple pieces. The head being labeled New England, followed by New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. The snake, chopped into pieces, is obviously in a pose which would seem to suggest it is deceased. The phrase join or die is fairly easy to read. The colonies either had to join together and act in union, or else they were certain to be slaughtered by the French and their Native American allies. Eventually, this political cartoon will see a second life during the American Revolution. So if your first exposure to it was as part of the American Revolution and not the French Indian War, don't be too surprised. Sometimes these political cartoons had a second life. This particular one is so popular it's had 3 or 4 different uses at different times by different groups of folks. So don't be surprised if you even still see this one online somewhere. So the end of the war. So in 1763, the war ends. Now, most of the French colonies are granted to either England or Spain. England takes possession of all of Canada, as well as the lands belonging to France, up until the eastern bank of the Mississippi River. Lands west of the Mississippi are granted to Spain. Now, many colonists were actually quite eager for this, hoping to settle into the Ohio Valley and points west of the Appalachians. However, their hopes for this were dashed when the British issued the Proclamation of 1763, which outlawed British colonists from being able to move into those regions, preserving them for Native Americans in the region. A move the British hoped would instill peace in the region. Unfortunately, the colonists would begin to see this as a trend of the British stymieing their political and economic development, which is one of the central charges that they raise against the British during the Revolution. Finally, we have the issue that will become the catalyst for almost everything we see in the Revolutionary period. War debt. Wars are expensive. Even to this day, the cost of waging a war and maintaining an army large enough to wage war remains a fairly daunting expense for any nation. And an empire like Great Britain faced a very hefty war bill from the years of fighting it had just gone through. The British Crown was in dire straits to figure out how to pay for this debt, and a general increase of taxes and a tightening of economic regulations was to follow. For most of Britain, this was difficult, but not all that unexpected. For the American colonies that had become accustomed to salutary neglect, the system would prove to be an enraging factor, which would eventually drive forward the course of the Revolution. But more on that in future lectures.